Fell out of bed again? I can't stand you anymore, my daughter said as I recovered from leg surgery. I just cried in silence. The next day, I packed my bags and moved into a caregiver's home. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. It was a Tuesday morning, and the sun streamed through the half-drawn curtains of my bedroom. I'd been back from the hospital for just 3 weeks after my double knee replacement surgery. The pain was still excruciating, like hot knives stabbing into my joints with every movement. My surgeon had warned me that at 72 recovery would be slow, but I hadn't anticipated just how helpless I would feel. That morning, I needed my pain medication desperately. The small orange bottle sat on my nightstand, just out of reach. I tried calling for Milani, my daughter, but she had the shower running and couldn't hear me. The throbbing in my knees intensified, and I made the decision to try reaching for the pills myself. Carefully, I shifted my weight to the edge of the bed, stretching my arm as far as it would go. My fingers grazed the bottle, pushing it further away. I leaned a little more, and then it happened. My balance failed me. One moment I was reaching, and the next I was on the hardwood floor, a sharp pain shooting through my hip and newly operated knees. I cried out, more from shock than pain. At first, though, the pain quickly followed. Through tears, I saw Milani rush into the room, her hair still dripping wet, a towel clutched around her body. "Mom, what happened?" she asked, though she could clearly see what had occurred. "I was trying to reach my pills," I explained, my voice trembling. "They were too far away and I fell out of bed again." "I can't stand you anymore," she snapped, cutting me off mid-sentence. Her voice wasn't just annoyed, it was filled with disgust, as if I had deliberately caused this inconvenience. I looked up at my daughter's face, searching for any trace of the warm, compassionate woman I thought I had raised. Instead, I saw only irritation and contempt. Her eyes, so like my late husband's, were cold and distant. She helped me back onto the bed roughly, her movements mechanical and impatient. No gentle reassurance, no checking if I'd hurt myself further. Just efficient, cold assistance, followed by a heavy sigh. "The home health nurse will be here at noon," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Try not to fall again before then. I have an important meeting this morning, and I can't miss it." With that, she turned and left, closing the door behind her with a force that wasn't quite a slam, but conveyed her frustration nonetheless. I sat there, my nightgown twisted around my legs, pain radiating through my body, and felt something inside me break. I had given everything to Milani. After George died when she was just 15, I worked 2 jobs to put her through college. I postponed my own retirement to help her with the down payment on her first house. When she asked me to move in with her last year because it would be easier for both of us, I had sold my small home, the one George and I had bought together, and used the money to renovate her basement into an accessible apartment for myself. And now, at my most vulnerable, this was what our relationship had become. I cried silently, careful not to make any sound that might further irritate Milani. The tears rolled down my weathered cheeks and soaked into the collar of my nightgown. Not tears of self-pity, but of mourning. For the relationship I thought we had. For the daughter I thought I knew. Later that day, after the home health nurse had checked my knees and helped me bathe, I asked her to hand me my address book from the drawer. "Is there someone you'd like me to call for you, Mrs. Wells?" she asked kindly. "No, dear," I replied. "I just need to look something up." When she left, I found the business card that my friend Marjorie had given me months ago. A place called Sunset Gardens, a residential care facility where her sister-in-law lived. "Just in case," Marjorie had said, and I had tucked it away, never thinking I would need it. That night, after Milani had gone to bed, I called the number on the card. The night manager answered, and I explained my situation in hushed tones. She was compassionate and practical, telling me they had a room available at the end of the week if I wanted to come see it. "Yes," I whispered into the phone. "I'll come." I hung up and stared at the ceiling, the decision cementing itself in my mind. For the first time in months, despite the physical pain, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I would not stay where I wasn't wanted. I would not be a burden to a daughter who couldn't stand me anymore. I had spent my entire adult life caring for others. It was time to find a place where someone might care for me. The next morning, while Milani was at work, I called a taxi and asked the driver to help me with my walker. I visited Sunset Gardens, signed the necessary paperwork, and put down a deposit using my small savings. The room was modest but clean, with a window overlooking a garden. It wasn't home, but perhaps it could be. When I returned, I began packing. Quietly, one small bag at a time, hiding them in my closet. I wrote a letter to Milani explaining my decision. Not accusatory, not bitter, just honest. I told her I loved her, but needed to be somewhere I wouldn't be a burden. I left out the pain her words had caused me. Some wounds are better left unmentioned. That night, I looked around the room that had been mine for the past year, remembering how hopeful I had been when I moved in. I thought we would grow closer, that I would be a help to her, not a hindrance. I thought we would have movie nights and Sunday dinners. I thought wrong. Tomorrow, while she was at work, I would leave. It would be better this way, for both of us. The morning I left my daughter's home was unusually quiet. Milani had rushed out earlier than normal, muttering something about a breakfast meeting with clients. She barely looked at me as she gathered her things, just called out, "Nurse comes at 10," before the front door slammed shut. I sat in my bed, listening to the silence of the empty house, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Today was the day. I wouldn't be here when Milani returned from work. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and called Sarah, the kind social worker from Sunset Gardens who had promised to help with my transition. "I'm ready," I told her, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Mrs. Wells," she replied warmly. "Do you need help with anything before I arrive?" "No, dear. I've been packing secretly all week. Everything's ready." After hanging up, I slowly made my way to the bathroom using my walker. Every step sent shooting pain through my newly operated knees, but I was determined to be as independent as possible today. I carefully washed my face, applied a touch of lipstick, rose petal, the same shade I'd worn for 40 years, and combed my silver hair. I wanted to leave with dignity. Back in my room, I looked at the 3 small suitcases I had packed. 72 years of life, reduced to 3 bags. I hadn't taken much: some clothes, toiletries, photo albums, and a few treasured mementos. The quilt George's mother had made for our wedding, the shell necklace Milani had strung for me when she was 8, my late husband's pocket watch. The letter I'd written to Milani lay on my neatly made bed, my daughter's name written in my shaky handwriting on the envelope. I picked it up, reading it one last time. "Dear Milani, by the time you read this, I will have moved to Sunset Gardens Assisted Living Facility. I've made arrangements to cover the costs with my pension and savings. Please know that I'm not leaving out of anger. I've simply realized that my presence has become a burden to you, and that was never my intention. You have your own life to live, and I don't want to be the reason you can't live it fully. I've left most of my things behind. Feel free to do with them what you wish. The only items I've taken are those with sentimental value. Please don't worry about me. I'll be well taken care of, and this is my choice. I hope you'll visit when you can, but I understand if you need time. I love you, sweetheart. I always have and always will. Mom tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter and placed it back on the bed. I hadn't mentioned her harsh words, "I can't stand you anymore," or how they had shattered my heart. What would be the point? Some wounds are better left unspoken. The doorbell rang precisely when Sarah had promised. She entered with a gentle smile, accompanied by a middle-aged man who introduced himself as the transportation aide. "Are these your bags, Mrs. Wells?" he asked, pointing to my suitcases. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. The reality of what I was doing hit me full force. I was leaving the home of my only child, leaving because I wasn't wanted. Sarah seemed to sense my distress. She sat beside me on the bed, her hand covering mine. "It's okay to have second thoughts, Harriet. This is a big step." I shook my head, finding my voice again. "No second thoughts, just memories." She nodded, understanding. "Would you like a moment alone before we go?" "Please," I whispered. As they took my bags to the car, I slowly made my way through the house, leaning heavily on my walker. I paused in the kitchen, remembering the Sunday dinners I used to prepare here when I first moved in. Before Milani started working weekends, before our conversations became stilted and uncomfortable. I touched the living room wall, where family photos hung in perfect frames. Milani as a baby in George's arms. Milani at her college graduation, her arm around my shoulder. Milani and me at her 30th birthday, both of us smiling. Though I remembered tension simmering beneath the surface even then. When had things changed? When had I shifted from mother to burden in her eyes? Was it gradual, or had it always been there, hidden beneath obligation and duty? In the hallway, I stopped at Milani's home office, the door slightly ajar. On her desk sat a framed photo I'd never seen before. Milani with a handsome man, both dressed elegantly at what appeared to be a formal event. She looked radiant, laughing into the camera, happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. Was there a new man in her life? Someone she hadn't told me about? The realization that my daughter was keeping parts of her life secret from me stung sharply, but also confirmed my decision. I had become so peripheral to her life that major developments no longer warranted sharing. "Mrs. Wells?" Sarah called gently from the front door. "The car is ready whenever you are." I took one last look around, then made my way slowly back to the entrance. "I'm ready now." The aide helped me into the car, folding my walker and placing it in the trunk with my bags. As we pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. Looking back would only make this harder. "You're very brave," Sarah said, sitting beside me in the back seat. I shook my head. "Not brave, just realistic. My daughter's life will be easier without having to care for me, and perhaps mine will be too." The drive to Sunset Gardens took about 40 minutes. I watched the familiar neighborhoods give way to parts of the city I rarely visited. We passed parks with children playing, shopping centers bustling with activity, life continuing all around while mine was changing forever. Sunset Gardens was nicer than I remembered from my brief visit. A large, Spanish-style building surrounded by well-maintained gardens, palm trees swaying gently in the breeze. Not the dreary nursing home I had feared in my darkest moments. The aide parked near the entrance where a small welcome committee waited. The facility director, a nurse, and a friendly-looking woman who introduced herself as my transition companion. "We're so glad you've chosen to join our community, Mrs. Wells," the director said warmly, helping me out of the car. Community. Not facility, not home. Community. The word felt like a balm to my wounded spirit. As I was wheeled through the entrance, they insisted I use a wheelchair today to protect my healing knees. I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. This wasn't how I had imagined my twilight years, leaving my daughter's home for a place among strangers. But perhaps here, I could find something I had lost: respect, dignity, and maybe even belonging. My room was on the second floor, with a small balcony overlooking the central courtyard. Someone had placed a vase of fresh daisies on the bedside table. The bed was neatly made with a colorful quilt, not unlike the one I'd brought with me. "We want you to make this space your own," the transition companion said, helping me settle into an armchair by the window. "Hang pictures. Bring in small furniture pieces if you like. This is your home now. Home." I tested the word in my mind as they brought in my bags and helped me unpack. Could this become home? Only time would tell. That night, alone in my new room, I wondered if Milani had returned from work yet, if she had found my letter, if she had called my phone, which I had turned off upon arrival, if she cared that I was gone. I didn't cry. I had shed enough tears in silence at my daughter's house. Instead, I watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks through my window, thinking about new beginnings at 72. Tomorrow would be my first full day at Sunset Gardens, my first day of a life I never expected, but one I would face with the same strength that had carried me through widowhood, through raising a child alone, through everything. Somewhere across the city, my daughter was reading my letter, or perhaps she had crumpled it up in anger or relief. Either way, I had taken back control of my life, no longer a burden to be tolerated, but a woman making her own choices, even at this late stage. My first week at Sunset Gardens passed in a blur of introductions, medical assessments, and adjusting to new routines. The staff was attentive without being overbearing, and I appreciated their efforts to respect my independence while ensuring my safety as I continued recovering from surgery. My phone remained off. I wasn't ready to face Milani's reaction, whether it was anger, relief, or worst of all, indifference. The thought of hearing her voice saying she hadn't even noticed I was gone was too painful to bear. On my 7th morning, I was sitting in the community room attempting to focus on a book when a woman about my age approached, leaning on a cane adorned with colorful beads. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Please do," I replied, grateful for the distraction from my thoughts. "I'm Eleanor Simmons," she said, easing herself down with a slight wince. "Arthritic hip. You?" "Harriet Wells," I responded. "Double knee replacement." She nodded knowingly. "The joys of aging. I've been watching you this week. You don't join the group activities much." I felt a flicker of defensiveness. "I'm still settling in." "Of course you are," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "We all went through it. I moved here 8 months ago, after my son decided I was too much trouble to have around." The bluntness of her statement startled me. "I'm sorry to hear that." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be. Best thing that could have happened. My son's a workaholic with a wife who never liked me. Now I play poker on Tuesdays, take watercolor classes on Thursdays, and don't have to pretend to enjoy my daughter-in-law's terrible lasagna." She leaned closer. "So what's your story? Children dump you here too?" "I left on my own," I said stiffly, not ready to share the painful details with a stranger. Eleanor studied me with shrewd eyes. That's what we all say at first. Pride's a powerful thing." She patted my hand. "When you're ready to talk about the real reason, come find me. I'm in 318, and just so you know, there's a group of us that meets on Friday afternoons. Unofficial, of course. We call ourselves the Discarded Darlings." With that, she rose and shuffled away, leaving me both offended and intrigued. Discarded Darlings. The name was both humorous and heartbreaking. Was that what I was now? Discarded? That afternoon, I finally turned on my phone. It immediately buzzed with notifications. 17 missed calls from Milani and nearly twice as many text messages. I took a deep breath and began reading. The first few were frantic. "Mom, where are you? Please call me." I called the hospitals. "Are you okay?" Then came anger. "I can't believe you just left without talking to me. This is so immature and irresponsible. You've put me through hell today." And finally, after presumably finding my letter, I found your note. "Sunset Gardens? Really? Without discussing it with me? Call me back. We need to talk about this. Mom, I'm coming there tomorrow if you don't call me back." The last message had been sent 3 days ago. Nothing since then. I stared at my phone, a heavy weight settling in my chest. She was angry, but she hadn't come. Part of me was relieved. I wasn't ready to face her. But another part ached with the confirmation that once the initial shock wore off, she hadn't deemed it necessary to follow through. My physical therapist, Miguel, found me still staring at my phone 20 minutes later. "Mrs. Wells, are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his young face. I quickly composed myself. "Yes, just checking messages. I'm ready for our session." Miguel was patient as he guided me through exercises to strengthen my knees. The pain was still significant, but less crippling than it had been at Milani's house. Perhaps it was the regular therapy, perhaps the lack of tension in my new environment. Either way, I was making progress. "You're doing great," Miguel encouraged as I completed the final repetition. "Much better than when you arrived. How does it feel?" "Better," I admitted. "Though I still hate that walker." He smiled. "Most people do, but stick with the program, and we might get you to a cane in another week or two." A cane. Like Eleanor's. I found myself wondering about her beaded accessory, so unlike the medical-looking canes I'd seen in the physical therapy room. After my session, instead of returning to my room as usual, I made my way to the activities room where an art class was in progress. I stood in the doorway, watching as residents of varying abilities worked on watercolor paintings of a fruit bowl arranged at the front of the room. "Are you joining us, Mrs. Wells?" asked the young woman leading the class, noticing me hovering in the entrance. "Not today," I replied. "I was just curious." "Well, we meet every Monday and Thursday at 2. You're welcome anytime." I nodded my thanks and continued my slow walk through the facility, exploring areas I hadn't yet visited. The garden courtyard was peaceful, with winding paths accessible to walkers and wheelchairs, and several seating areas beneath shade trees. A small library offered books, magazines, and comfortable chairs. In the recreation room, 2 men were playing chess while others watched a baseball game on television. It was all perfectly pleasant, and yet I felt like an outsider looking in at a life I wasn't quite ready to claim as my own. Back in my room, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older than I remembered, with deeper lines around her eyes and mouth, her silver hair flat and lifeless. "Who are you now?" I whispered to my reflection. Not Milani's mother, not anymore. At least not in the way I had been. Not George's wife, not for many years. Just Harriet. But who was Harriet without those defining relationships? On Friday afternoon, I found myself standing outside room 318, debating whether to knock. What would these discarded darlings expect? From me? Tearful confessions? Bitter tirades against my daughter? Before I could decide, the door opened and Eleanor stood there, eyebrows raised. "Are you coming in, or just planning to lurk in my doorway all day?" she asked. I wasn't sure if I should join, I admitted. "Nonsense." "You absolutely should," she declared, taking my arm and guiding me inside. Her room was personalized in a way mine wasn't yet. Colorful throws over the standard issue furniture, walls covered with framed artwork, potted plants on every surface. 5 other women were already there, sitting in a loose circle of chairs. "Everyone, this is Harriet," Eleanor announced. "She's new, still thinks she came here voluntarily, and has excellent taste in cardigans." A ripple of gentle laughter went through the group, and to my surprise, I found myself smiling too. "Welcome, Harriet," said a tiny woman with startlingly bright red hair. "I'm Dot. Don't believe everything Eleanor tells you about us. We're not bitter, we're just honest." "Speak for yourself," chuckled another woman. "I'm Mabel, and I am absolutely bitter. My daughter-in-law redecorated my house while I was recovering from gallbladder surgery, and when I objected to the leopard print sofa, they decided I'd be happier here." Each woman introduced herself, each with a story of how they had come to Sunset Gardens. Some were heartbreaking, others darkly humorous, all painfully familiar in one way or another. When they looked to me expectantly, I took a deep breath. "My daughter said she couldn't stand me anymore after I fell trying to reach my medication. I left the next day." The simple statement hung in the air, and I was surprised by how cathartic it felt to say the words aloud. No defense of Milani, no explanation of how tired she must have been, or how difficult I must have been to care for. Just the plain, painful truth. Dot reached over and squeezed my hand. "Welcome to the club, honey." And somehow, in that moment, I felt a weight lift. These women understood in a way no one else could. Here, I didn't have to pretend. Here, perhaps, I could begin to figure out who Harriet was now. A month passed, and I settled into the rhythm of life at Sunset Gardens. My knees improved enough that I graduated from the walker to a cane, a beautiful wooden one that Eleanor helped me decorate with colorful fabric strips and small charms, each representing something important to me. A tiny silver book for my love of reading, a miniature paintbrush for my newfound interest in watercolors, a locket containing a picture of George. The discarded darlings, as I now proudly counted myself among them, met every Friday. Those afternoons became the highlight of my week, a time of honest conversation, sometimes tears, often laughter. We shared updates on our families, those who still had contact, compared notes on the facility's meals, and supported each other through health challenges and homesickness. Milani hadn't visited. After those initial messages, her communication dwindled to a text every week or so, usually just asking how I was feeling. I responded with brief, pleasant updates about my recovery, never mentioning the hurt that still lingered beneath my words. She never referenced our last morning together or apologized for what she'd said. It hung between us, unacknowledged. Was in the community garden on a crisp October morning, working on a watercolor of the rose bushes, when Denise, the receptionist, approached me. "Mrs. Wells, you have a visitor," she said, her tone carefully neutral. I looked up, my heart suddenly racing. "Milani?" Denise shook her head. "No, it's a man. He says he's your son-in-law." Son-in-law? Milani had been divorced for years, and as far as I knew, wasn't seeing anyone seriously enough to call a husband. Curious and confused, I gathered my art supplies and followed Denise to the visiting area. A tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair stood as I entered. He looked to be in his late 40s, dressed in a casual but expensive-looking sweater and slacks. "Mrs. Wells," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Ted Armstrong, Milani's husband." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Husband?" I finally managed. "Milani is married?" A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "For almost 6 months now. I'm sorry, I assumed you knew." 6 months. My daughter had been married for half a year and I hadn't known, hadn't been told, hadn't been invited. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the chairs, trying to maintain my composure despite the shock. "I'm afraid Milani hasn't shared much about her life with me recently." Ted sat across from me, a frown creasing his brow. "That's actually why I'm here. May I speak frankly, Mrs. Wells?" "Harriet, please. And yes, I'd appreciate frankness." He leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Harriet, Milani told me she placed you in this facility because you were struggling to manage on your own after your surgery. She said it was a mutual decision." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Is that what she told you? That this was mutual?" Ted's frown deepened. "I take it that's not the case." "No," I said simply. "It wasn't mutual. I left after Milani made it clear I was a burden she could no longer bear." I saw genuine surprise in his eyes. "Could you tell me what happened? Your version, I mean." Something in his tone, in the careful way he asked, made me think he wasn't here to defend Milani, but to understand the situation. So I told him about the fall, Milani's harsh words, my decision to leave rather than stay where I wasn't wanted. Ted listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I suspected something wasn't right," he finally said. "The way Milani changes the subject whenever I ask about you, her reluctance to visit. It didn't fit with the close relationship she initially described. We were close once," I said softly, "before she became successful, before I became old and infirm." Ted shook his head. "Age and infirmity shouldn't change love." He hesitated, then added, "I lost my mother to cancer 5 years ago. I would give anything to have had more time with her, even if it meant caring for her through illness." The sincerity in his voice touched me. "You sound like a good son." I tried to be. He straightened in his chair. "Harriet, I didn't know about you until after Milani and I were married. We had a whirlwind romance, met at a charity function, engaged 3 months later, married in a small ceremony." Without her mother present, I couldn't help adding, "She told me you were too ill to attend," Ted said, wincing at the revelation. "I'm beginning to realize there's a lot Milani hasn't been honest about. I studied this man, my apparent son-in-law, trying to reconcile his existence with the daughter, who had kept him a secret from me." "Why are you here, Ted? Why now?" He met my gaze directly. "Because I found your letter. Milani kept it in her desk drawer. I came across it while looking for some documents, and it contradicted everything she'd told me about your situation. I needed to see for myself. My letter, the one I'd left on my bed the day I departed. She'd kept it but never responded to what I'd written." "And now that you've seen for yourself?" I asked. "Now I think my wife and I need to have a serious conversation." He paused. "And I think she needs to make things right with you." I shook my head. "I don't want her forced into an apology she doesn't mean." "It's not about forcing an apology," Ted replied. "It's about honesty and responsibility. Milani presents herself as someone who values family above all. It's one of the things that attracted me to her. But this," he gestured around at the facility, "this deception doesn't align with those values." I felt a strange mixture of emotions: vindication that someone else saw through Milani's narrative, sadness that her dishonesty extended to her marriage, and a tiny, persistent spark of hope that perhaps things could change. "What will you do?" I asked. Ted stood, straightening his sweater. "First, I'll talk to Milani. Then, if you're willing, I'd like to bring her here to see you, to start rebuilding whatever can be salvaged." "I'd like that," I admitted. "Despite everything, she's still my daughter." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I should go. Thank you for your honesty, Harriet. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry we're just meeting now." I would have liked to know you sooner. After Ted left, I sat alone in the visiting area for a long time, processing what had just happened. My daughter was married. She had lied to her husband about me, about why I was here. And now that lie was unraveling. I didn't know whether to feel hopeful or terrified about what might come next. That evening, I shared the news with Eleanor as we sat in her room, working on knitting projects, hers an elaborate sweater, mine a simple scarf that kept developing mysterious extra stitches. So the daughter who couldn't stand you anymore got married without telling you, then lied to her husband about abandoning you here? Eleanor summarized bluntly. And now he's promising to bring her for a family reunion? Sounds like a soap opera. I die. Couldn't help laughing at her assessment. When you put it that way, it does sound rather dramatic. Eleanor set down her knitting. The question is, what do you want from this, Harriet? Are you ready to forgive her? I considered the question carefully. I don't know if it's about forgiveness exactly. I just want the truth acknowledged. I want Milani to see me, really see me, as a person, not just a problem to be solved or a burden to be shifted elsewhere. And if she can't do that? Eleanor asked gently. Then at least I'll know, I said. And I can stop waiting for something that will never happen. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was from Ted. Spoke with Milani. It didn't go well. She's angry I came to see you, but we're working through it. Don't give up hope. Will. Be in touch soon. I set the phone on my nightstand, my emotions too tangled to sort through. My daughter was angry that her husband had discovered her lies. Would this push her further away? Or could it be the catalyst for honest communication at last? As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking about the watercolor class I'd finally joined. The instructor had taught us about negative space, the areas around and between subjects that help define the subject itself. Sometimes, she explained, the negative space is as important as what you're painting. Perhaps the space between Milani and me, the silence, the distance, had been defining us both for too long. Maybe it was time to fill that space with something new, even if it began with confronting painful truths. Tomorrow, I decided, I would paint something for Milani. Not as a peace offering exactly, but as a statement. This is who I am now. This is what I've become in your absence. See me. A week passed with no further word from Ted or Milani. I tried to focus on my daily activities, physical therapy, art class, afternoon tea with the discarded darlings, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. Had Ted's intervention made things worse? Had Milani forbidden him from contacting me again? Was putting the finishing touches on the painting I'd created for Milani, a watercolor of a mother and daughter standing with their backs to each other, connected only by the faintest thread of light between them, when there was a knock at my door. Mrs. Wells? It was Denise from reception. You have visitors in the main lounge. Visitors. Plural. My heart jumped to my throat. Thank you, I said, setting down my paintbrush. I'll be right there. I took a moment to collect myself, smoothing my cardigan and checking my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had arrived at Sunset Gardens 2 months ago. My eyes were clearer, my posture straighter. Even my silver hair seemed to have more life, styled in a becoming bob that Mabel, a former hairdresser, had cut for me last week. I was no longer just surviving. I was living. With my decorated cane in one hand and the painting carefully tucked under my other arm, I made my way to the lounge. As I approached, I could hear raised voices, one unmistakably Milani's, her tone sharp with frustration. I can't believe you brought me here like this. We should have discussed it more. We've been discussing it for days, Milani. Ted's deeper voice interrupted. Or rather, I've been trying to discuss it while you've been avoiding the subject. I paused in the doorway, momentarily unnoticed. Milani stood with her back to me, her shoulders tense beneath a crisp blazer. Ted sat on the sofa, his expression weary but determined. When he spotted me, relief flashed across his face. "Harriet," he said, standing. "Thank you for coming." Milani whirled around, her eyes widening as they fell on me. For a moment, she looked like the little girl I remembered. Uncertain, vulnerable. Then her professional mask slipped back into place. "Mom," she said stiffly. "You're looking well." "Hello?" "Milani," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's been a while." An awkward silence stretched between us. Ted gestured to the seating area. "Shall we sit?" I moved forward, settling into an armchair, the painting resting against my leg. Milani reluctantly sat on the edge of the sofa, as far from Ted as possible. "I was beginning to think you weren't going to visit," I said, looking directly at my daughter. Milani fidgeted with her watch. "I've been busy. Work is demanding, and with the wedding I wasn't invited to?" The words slipped out. Before I could stop them, her eyes darted to Ted, then back to me. "It was very small, just a few close friends. We didn't want a big fuss." "Not even enough fuss for your mother?" I asked quietly. Ted cleared his throat. "Milani, we agreed to be honest today." She shot him an irritated look before turning back to me. "Fine. I didn't invite you because I didn't want to explain to everyone why my mother was living in a care facility. It would have raised too many questions." The bluntness of her admission stung, but it was the truth I had been seeking. "Questions about why you couldn't stand me anymore?" I asked, quoting her words from that fateful morning. Milani flushed. "I was stressed that day. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "How exactly did you mean it then?" She threw up her hands. "Mom, you were impossible to care for. You needed constant attention. You complained about everything. You made me late for work repeatedly. My whole life was being consumed by your needs." "So you resented me," I stated flatly. "Yes," she exclaimed, then immediately looked ashamed. "I mean, it was complicated. I wanted to help you, but it was too much. I'm not a nurse. I have a career, a life, a husband," I added pointedly. Milani at least had the grace to look guilty. "Ted and I were already engaged when you moved in. I was going to tell you, but then your surgery happened, and everything became so chaotic. Chaotic enough that you forgot to mention you were getting married?" I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. Ted leaned forward. "Harriet, for what it's worth, I had no idea you didn't know about our engagement or wedding. Milani told me you were too ill to attend." I nodded, acknowledging his words while keeping my focus on my daughter. "Were you ashamed of me, Milani? Is that why you kept your marriage a secret?" "No," she protested, then hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. You were so different after your surgery. Needy, dependent. You weren't the strong mother I remembered. It was like watching you disappear." Her words cut deep, but they also illuminated something I hadn't fully understood before. Milani hadn't just been frustrated by the practical challenges of caring for me. She had been grieving the loss of the mother she thought she knew. I was still me, I said softly. Just a version of me that needed help. "I know that now," she admitted. "But at the time, I couldn't handle it. When I found your note saying you'd left, part of me was relieved." She glanced at Ted, who nodded encouragingly. "And part of me was terrified that everyone would know what a terrible daughter I was, letting my mother go to a care home." "So you created a narrative where it was a mutual decision," Ted supplied. "Where you were the devoted daughter who found the best care for her ailing mother?" Milani nodded miserably. It was easier than facing the truth. I studied my daughter's face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tightness around her mouth. She was suffering too, in her own way. Milani, I said carefully, I didn't leave to punish you. I left because I believed it would be better for both of us. You wouldn't have to bear the burden of caring for me, and I wouldn't have to live where I wasn't wanted. But that's just it, she burst out. I did want you in my life, just not the way things were going. You never talked to me about how you were feeling, I pointed out. You just got increasingly distant and resentful. Because I felt guilty. Tears welled in her eyes. What kind of daughter resents taking care of her own mother? What kind of daughter feels trapped by her mother's needs? I was ashamed of those feelings, so I buried them until I couldn't anymore. Ted reached for her hand, but she pulled away, standing abruptly. I should never have brought you to live with me, she said, pacing now. It was a mistake. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. And now look at us. You're in a care home. I'm a terrible daughter, and everyone knows it. I don't think you're terrible, I said, my voice gentle. I think you're human. We both are. She stopped pacing, looking at me in surprise. Milani, caring for an aging parent is hard. I should know. I cared for your grandmother in her final years. It's exhausting, frustrating, and sometimes thankless. I understand that now more than ever. Then why do I feel so awful? She whispered. Because you care, I replied simply. If you didn't, you wouldn't feel guilty at all. Ted stood, moving to Milani's side. Perhaps this is an opportunity for a fresh start, a more honest relationship between you two. I reached for the painting, beside my chair. That's my hope too. I made this for you, Milani. She hesitantly took the watercolor, studying it with confusion, then dawning understanding. It's us, she said softly, standing apart but still connected. I nodded. That's how it's felt, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Milani's fingers traced the delicate thread of light between the two figures. I didn't know you could paint. There's a lot we don't know about each other anymore, I said. But we could change that, if you're willing. She looked up, tears streaming freely now. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for what I said, for how I treated you, for not inviting you to my wedding. I was wrong. It was the apology I had waited months to hear. But now that it had arrived, I realized something important. It wasn't enough just to hear the words. What mattered was what came next. I accept your apology, I said carefully. But Milani, I need to know. What do you want from our relationship going forward? She looked startled by the question. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Ted touched her shoulder gently. Perhaps that's something you both need to consider carefully. I nodded in agreement. I don't need an answer today, but I do need you to be honest, with yourself and with me. No more pretending, no more convenient narratives. Milani wiped her tears, straightening her shoulders. That's fair. I can do that. As they prepared to leave, Milani hesitated, then asked, Are you happy here, Mom? Really? I considered the question seriously. I'm finding my way. I have friends, activities, proper care for my knees. It's not what I expected for this chapter of my life, but it's not without its blessings. She nodded, absorbing this. Could I? Would it be okay if I visited again? Maybe for lunch next weekend? I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. After they left, I returned to my room, emotions swirling. The confrontation had been painful but necessary. Wounds that had festered in silence had finally been exposed to air. Whether they would heal properly remained to be seen. But at least now there was a chance. 6 months had passed since that difficult confrontation with Milani. Winter had given way to spring, and with it came gradual, tentative growth in our relationship. True to her word, Milani had begun visiting, awkwardly at first, our conversations stilted and careful. But each visit became a little easier, a little more genuine. Today was different, though. Today, Milani was coming to help me move. I stood in my room at Sunset Gardens, surveying the space that had been my home through one of the most transformative periods of my life. My artwork adorned the walls, watercolors capturing the changing seasons, the gardens, and portraits of my discarded darling's friends. Books lined the small shelf Ted had brought me as a Christmas gift. Photographs, old and new, sat framed on the dresser. This room had witnessed my journey from broken-hearted mother to something else entirely. A woman with her own identity, separate from her roles as wife and mother. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Eleanor stood there, leaning on her beaded cane, her eyes suspiciously bright. "So today's the day," she said, trying to sound matter-of-fact but not quite succeeding. "Today's the day," I confirmed, opening my arms to her. She stepped into my embrace, holding tight for a moment before pulling back. "The darlings won't be the same without you, Harriet. I'll still come for Friday meetings," I promised. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Eleanor nodded, blinking rapidly. "We're holding you to that. Dot's already threatened to hunt you down, if you miss a session." The thought of tiny, red-headed Dot pursuing me with her walker made me laugh. I believe her. "Are you sure about this move?" Eleanor asked, her voice dropping to a serious tone. "You've built a life here. You don't owe Milani anything." I considered her question carefully. "I'm not doing it for Milani, or out of obligation. I'm doing it because it feels right for me now. 6 months ago, I wasn't ready. Now I am." She studied my face, then nodded, satisfied with what she saw there. "Then I'm happy for you. Just remember you always have a place here if you need it." Another knock, and Denise appeared. "Mrs. Wells, your daughter and son-in-law are here." Eleanor squeezed my hand one last time before departing with a whispered, "Be happy, friend." Moments later, Milani and Ted entered, both smiling warmly. "Ready, Mom?" Milani asked, glancing around at the boxes stacked neatly by the door. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Ted began loading the boxes onto a cart while Milani helped me gather the last few personal items. "The guest house is all set up," she said, carefully wrapping a framed photo of George. "Ted installed the grab bars in the bathroom yesterday, and we put in that adjustable bed you liked when we went shopping." "Thank you, dear. That sounds perfect." Ted returned for another load. "The movers have already delivered your furniture to the guest house. Once we get these last boxes, you'll be all set." The guest house, a small but lovely cottage on Ted and Milani's property, originally built as a pool house but renovated over the past months specifically for me. Independent living with family nearby, a compromise that honored both my need for autonomy and our desire to rebuild our relationship. It hadn't been Milani's idea initially. After several weeks of regular visits, it was Ted who suggested it during a lunch at Sunset Gardens. "The pool house is just sitting empty," he'd said. "With some renovations, it could be perfect for Harriet. Close enough for regular interaction, but separate enough for privacy." Milani had looked uncertain. "I don't know. Mom, would you even want that, after everything?" I'd been equally hesitant. "It's a generous offer, but I'm not sure if it's wise. We've only just started to repair our relationship." "Maybe that's exactly why it could work," Ted had suggested. "You'd have your own space, your own life, but opportunities to build new memories together. No pressure, no forced cohabitation like before." We'd agreed to think about it, And over the following months, as our relationship slowly healed, the idea took root and flourished. Now, as we loaded the last of my belongings into Ted's SUV, I took a final look around the room that had sheltered me through my darkest days. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty space. The drive to Ted and Milani's home took about 30 minutes. As we turned into their driveway, I felt a flutter of nerves. Was this the right decision? Was I setting myself up for more heartbreak? But as we rounded the curve of the circular drive, I caught my first glimpse of the guest house, a charming cottage with a fresh coat of pale yellow paint, white trim, and a small covered porch adorned with flowering planters. It looked nothing like the pool house I remembered from my previous visits. "Surprise," Milani said, watching my reaction. "We painted it last weekend. Yellow was always your favorite color." I was touched that she remembered. "It's beautiful." Inside, the transformation was even more remarkable. The space had been completely reconfigured to create an accessible, comfortable living area with a small kitchenette, bedroom, bathroom, and sitting room. Large windows let in abundant natural light, and French doors opened onto a private patio. But what truly took my breath away were the details. The bookshelf filled with my favorite authors, the easel set up by the window with new art supplies, the comfortable chair identical to the one I'd loved at Sunset Gardens. They had paid attention to what mattered to me. "What do you think?" Milani asked, an edge of anxiety in her voice. "Is it okay?" "It's more than okay," I said, emotion tightening my throat. "It's perfect." Ted smiled, squeezing Milani's shoulder. "I'll start bringing in the boxes. You two take your time." When he'd gone, Milani and I stood in silence for a moment, taking in the significance of this new beginning. "I was so afraid you'd say no," she finally admitted. "That you'd rather stay at Sunset Gardens than take a chance on us again." "I almost did," I confessed. "Not because I didn't want to be closer to you, but because I was afraid of falling back into old patterns." She nodded, understanding. "I was afraid too. Afraid I'd get overwhelmed again, that I'd resent having you nearby, that I'd fail you somehow." "What? Changed your mind?" I asked. Milani took a deep breath. "Therapy, for one thing. Ted insisted we both get help, individually and as a couple, after everything that happened. It's been enlightening." "In what way?" I realized I've spent my whole life terrified of dependency, of needing others and of others needing me. When you needed my care after your surgery, it triggered all those fears. Instead of acknowledging them, I pushed you away. Her honesty moved me. We all have our fears, Milani. Mine was becoming a burden, being unwanted. I think that's why your words hurt so deeply that day. "I'm still sorry for that," she said softly. "I wish I could take it back." "I know," I assured her. "But perhaps if you hadn't said it, we wouldn't be here now." Sometimes painful honesty is the beginning of healing. Ted returned with more boxes, and soon we fell into a rhythm of unpacking and arranging. By late afternoon, the cottage had transformed from a beautiful but impersonal space into my home. As evening approached, Ted disappeared back to the main house, returning with a picnic basket. "Dinner is served," he announced, setting it on the small dining table. "I thought we'd eat here tonight, christen the place properly." The three of us sat down to a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken, fresh bread, and salad. As we ate, conversation flowed more easily than it had in years. We talked about Ted's work as an architect, Milani's recent promotion, my art classes, and plans for the garden between the main house and cottage. "I was thinking," Milani said as we finished our meal, "that maybe you could teach me to paint." I always admired that about you, your creativity, even before you started taking classes. The request surprised me. "I'd love that." though I'm hardly an expert. Better than me, she smiled. I can barely draw a stick figure. Ted raised his glass. To new beginnings, new skills, and family, however we define it. We clinked glasses, and I felt a warm sense of rightness settle over me. This arrangement wasn't perfect, and our relationship would still require work, but we were trying. Really trying. After dinner, they helped me finish organizing the bedroom, then prepared to leave me to settle in for my first night. At the door, Milani hesitated. Are you sure you'll be okay alone? Tonight? Do you need anything else? I smiled at her concern, genuine now, not born of obligation. I'll be fine. I've gotten quite used to managing on my own. I know you have, she acknowledged. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. We're both stronger than we knew. After they left, I sat on my new patio as twilight deepened into night. The lights of the main house glowed warmly in the distance, close enough for comfort, but far enough for independence. Above, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Well, George, I said softly to the night air. This isn't how I imagined spending my 70s, but I think it's going to be all right. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree overhead, and I smiled, thinking of Eleanor and the discarded. Darlings, none of us had expected the twists our lives had taken, but we had found our way forward nonetheless. Tomorrow, I would hang my artwork on these new walls. I would arrange my books just the way I liked them. I would plant flowers in the garden plot Ted had prepared for me. I would begin creating a new chapter. I was no longer just Milani's mother, no longer defined solely by my relationship to others. I was Harriet Wells, artist, friend, survivor, and yes, mother too. But on my own terms now, with boundaries and expectations we had established together. I had fallen from my bed and lost my daughter's love. Then I had packed my bags and found myself. And somehow, improbably, I had found my way back to a different, more honest relationship with Milani. Not all stories have perfect endings. Some just have new beginnings, again and again, for as long as we're brave enough to try. This was mine. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites. And they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.